Welcome to the 15th DEM I Wonder webinar. DEM has so many services, offerings, programs, and hidden gems that we want to share with all of you. So we're excited to take just a few minutes each week to highlight these features in our weekly webinar. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many exercises have been postponed or canceled. The Utah Division of Emergency Management is hosting this weekly webinar series aimed at providing local emergency managers with relevant content and opportunities to enhance their capabilities. Webinars will be live for Q&A and will be recorded for later viewing on the DEM website and YouTube channel. Most of these webinars will be seminars or workshops with a hands-on portion, which will allow emergency managers to become oriented to a DEM process or test a DEM product. Our schedule today will be as follows. We'll start with our ground rules and etiquette. Next, we will have a brief presentation by Jonna Whitesides on how does statewide mutual aid work. Following the presentation, there will be a hands-on portion where participants will be encouraged to test out the product or process that was presented. Following the hands-on portion of our program, the presenter will be available for a Q&A session. Following the Q&A, we will close with a short message about upcoming webinars. The ground rules today are fairly simple. Please mute your line while the presenter is presenting. If you have a question, you may type it in the group chat or unmute at the appropriate time to ask your question. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Thank you all for your attendance today. And with that, we'll turn the time over to Jonna Whitesides.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Tracy. Such a great host and facilitator. So today, the I Wonder webinar series is how does statewide mutual aid work, or what is it? And so I really want to kind of focus on a couple things. And if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. This is kind of our overview for today. So I'll talk a little bit about what the Statewide Mutual Aid Act is. So that's the statute or the law that allows us to carry out the system or the processes of statewide mutual aid. We will also look at what other agreements are commonplace amongst government jurisdictions, how DEM facilitates mutual aid. So you may be thinking, I already have an MOA or an MOU or a memorandum of understanding with my contiguous jurisdictions, whether you're a city or a county. But then what would DEM do for us? And then how to activate a mutual aid agreement under the Statewide Mutual Aid Act, how to request reimbursement, and then we'll go into a Q&A. Next slide, please. So for reference, if you're ever really bored and you want to read state code, you can go to Utah Code annotated 53-2A-3. And this talks about the Statewide Mutual Aid Act. So the first thing that it establishes is what a committee. And that committee is charged with meeting regularly. Now we know with COVID-19 that hasn't been the case for a lot of these committees and commissions. However, I do want you to be aware of the committee because they are the ones who can receive feedback from your jurisdiction to say, hey, DEM this way, or have you ever thought about changing this up a little bit? The good thing with the Statewide Mutual Aid Act is it does give administrative authority to the Division of Emergency Management to change processes. So the processes are not outlined in code. Those are things that come before the committee and then they determine those things. So like it says here, they review the progress and the status. And I put these other 4 sub-bullet points because they are to kind of let you know who is representative on that committee. We have 2 who represent public safety interlocal entities. And a public safety interlocal entity, for reference, is just an interlocal entity that provides public safety service that includes fire protection, police protection, emergency medical service, and hazardous material response service. So those could be local emergency planning committees. Those could be, I know in the Salt Lake Valley we have Task Force 5, which is a group, a consortium of city fire agencies that come together to train and to work. And there are lots of other interlocal aid entities out there. Currently, the 2 members that we have representing those entities are Jim Buchanan and Chief John Evans. We also have the counties that are represented, which we have Will Lusk from Cache County and Ron Whitehead from Washington County. So two different ends of the state. For the cities, we currently have Chief Solomon Oberg with Kaysville City Police Department and Andrew Johnson with Bountiful City, representing the Bountiful City Electricity or Power Department. And then we have a couple state agencies, the Division of Emergency Management, as well as the Utah National Guard and the Utah Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I want to make really clear today is that the Statewide Mutual Aid Act does not limit political subdivisions, so cities, towns, counties, special service districts, from entering into other agreements, including mutual aid. So if you have your own mutual aid agreements, that is great, and we actually encourage that because those can be done based upon the need, based upon your geographic area, based upon your resources that you have available. Those are very much encouraged. The Statewide Mutual Aid Act is kind of for a, I would say in a sense, it's kind of a catch-all or even a fail-safe for those jurisdictions who do not have currently any mutual aid in place. Or it can be used in an emergency when you are overwhelmed and you say, hey, state of Utah, I need your help to facilitate this mutual aid. So just want to make that very clear. So, and it gives DEM a little bit of authority, and go ahead on the rest of those bullet points. So the first one is to receive an inventory of state and local resources that are deployable and shareable. And typically that's defined as those things that have been purchased with grant equipment. And there may be other things that have been purchased with local funds or state funds that you are able to share those and they are deployable as a resource. Also to coordinate and assist with those resources. So again, you may already have your things in place, but if you're overwhelmed, you can call DEM and say, hey, I need help with this. Can you guys help me? Next slide, please. So, and then a couple things that it allows all state and political subdivisions is to respond to an emergency or disaster. So you don't have to say, well, does our city ordinance, does our county ordinance, does the law allow us to leave outside of our jurisdictions and assist? And the answer is yes. Under the Statewide Mutual Aid Act, you can. And there are a couple other references in state code that also allow for mutual aid, but this one is specific to disasters and emergencies. You can actually also carry out an authorized drill or exercise. So let's say, you know, post-COVID and post everything else that happened in 2020, you're like, we should get together and exercise with, you know, the handful of cities in our area or counties, and we should really look at our lessons learned. You can use the Statewide Mutual Aid Act to do that so that you can say, okay, either everybody's going to come and the cost is on each participating person, or we're going to ask, we have a little bit of training money, we're going to ask, you know, city A, B, and C to come, and we will cover some of their costs. This is where you can also utilize the Statewide Mutual Aid Act. And then for the responding jurisdiction to donate the resources, you may have the ability to say, you know, for the first 24 hours, we can provide it at no cost because that's what we do in Utah. We care for our neighbors and we help everybody in need. Or you can say, you know what, I know that you've got a really bad wildfire in your county, but we've also got one as well. So I can only send maybe about half of what you've asked for, because we also want to make sure that jurisdictions are not left unguarded for things that may be happening in their own jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Oh, and then it also defines that resources are under the control of that incident commander. So if I am working for County A and I go to respond in County B, just knowing that, hey, this is a little bit incident command system structured, or ICS, in the sense that once we get there, we're going to kind of be under that operational direction so that we can achieve the objectives that that local incident commander has set, and we can more effectively respond to the emergency. It also provides a reimbursement process. So whether that's just a fact of you don't have the time to work that out, you need a little bit of administrative help, the Division of Emergency Management can do that if we have been asked to initiate the mutual aid kind of from the get-go. And then also, it allows the responding resources to be, they should be considered credentialed and certified. And so that's just, there's a lot of, and I think I've learned this in COVID-19, there's a lot of credentials and certifications that are outside of our typical emergency responder, police, fire, EMS. There's a lot of other things that can, so it allows to make sure that what you are getting, the people that are qualified and credentialed. Next slide, please. So here's we kind of talked about the Statewide Mutual Aid Act, right? But again, I think it's great if you do have your own MOUs, MOAs, Memorandum of Understanding, Memorandum of Agreement. Again, we talk a lot in acronyms, so we want to make sure that we spell that out. And then in Utah Code 1113, there's actually what's called the Interlocal Cooperation Act. And this basically kind of expounds upon the MOU, MOA in the sense that certain jurisdictions can come together to be able to form, sometimes it's a committee, sometimes it's a commission, but to be able to have an interlocal agreement as far as services that are provided or mutual aid that's rendered. Again, when we go back to what we're talking, the Statewide Mutual Aid Act, we're talking specifically about public safety interlocal agreements or entities, which again, that's that fire, law enforcement, EMS, or hazardous materials. So yeah, if you don't have your own MOAs, MOUs, definitely encourage that. And really that conversation just begins with calling your neighbor and saying, hey, let's talk mutual aid. Because then again, that I think in some instances it's a little bit more effective. It's one less phone call probably up through to the state. That doesn't mean that we're not willing and ready to help when we need to, but we definitely want you to have all the tools in the toolbox that are available. So how does DEM facilitate mutual aid? So this is kind of the scenario. We've got really bad wildfire, because that's probably what we're going to have this year because of the moisture we've received. And we've got a jurisdiction that's just up to their eyeballs in fire. Resources are getting low. They know that they need some resources, and they may even know where to get those resources, but they just don't have the time for the administrative work. This is where DEM can facilitate the mutual aid under the Statewide Mutual Aid Act. We basically act as a broker. But the good thing about us being a broker is we don't charge anything. So you're getting a free broker. And basically what we do is we'll coordinate on behalf of the requesting jurisdiction with those potential responding jurisdictions. So it could be that you call us and say, hey, I know that County B has the resources that I need. We just don't have time to work out all the details with them. Can you do that? This is what we need. This is where we need it. And this is how long we need it. And then we can go to that county and say, hey, County A has asked us to work with you and see if you can utilize your resources to respond. And we will basically coordinate that. If that county is agreeable to that, or if that county doesn't have the resources, then we're going to start contacting other ones around them, other potential resources. When we find the ones that are able to respond, then DEM would execute the agreement between both parties. And it's a 2-page form. It's called the Activation Agreement. SMAA stands for Statewide Mutual Aid Act, Form 113. And then when everything's been demobilized and everything's done, then we can also coordinate, well, we would coordinate the reimbursement request for those resources. So that's how we would facilitate it. Now the next question, and there's a lot about statewide mutual aid, right? But today we're just kind of focused on just very basic so that we can have a good understanding, and hopefully so I don't put you to sleep either. But how to activate a mutual aid agreement. So this is the kind of the hands-on portion. So Tracy, I'm not sure if we give them a second to open another browser. Should we do that? Have everybody open another browser? Or maybe I guess she's going to put it in the note and the comments. And if you'll just click on that link, and I'll cross my fingers that it works. Just kidding, I tested it this morning. Just put that, you may just have to copy it and put it in your browser. Just give everybody just a second to get there. And that will take you to the Division of Emergency Management's website. But it will jump you right to the mutual aid portion. All right, the next step on that is to just go ahead and click on mutual aid forms are available here. So back on that screen. Just click right there. And there are quite a few forms. What we're going to do is we're going to scroll down. Going to scroll down to where it says mutual aid documents or mutual aid forms, and then there's a subheading that says mutual aid documents. And the first form we're going to look at is Form 100. Now, this is not a requirement. It's more of just kind of a checklist. This will give you just a checklist for requesting. So again, mutual aid under the Statewide Mutual Aid Act, and if I did not mention this previously, there should be a declared emergency. And state of emergency means a local one, state one, city, county. And you need to request another political subdivision to provide support. The request comes from the Chief Executive Officer or designee. So again, if that's been designated to you as an emergency manager, then that's great. Or it may be you as the emergency manager coordinating it and just really getting the signature from the CEO of your jurisdiction. Report the request made by the CEO or designee to the, now it can be either to your liaison officer or the Division of Emergency Management. It just really, we don't want to say a definite, it's this way or the other way, because really we don't know what the circumstance is going to be, right? It could be multiple counties and that liaison officer may be embedded in one of the EOCs and they may not be available. Or if they are available, then they're probably the quickest one. So again, just trying to be flexible, give you a couple options. Request can be, it can be just a verbal, and then we'll help follow up with the administrative stuff within about 48 hours. Again, we want to do everything possible to get the resource out the door as quickly as possible. And then the requesting political subdivision will reimburse the supporting political subdivision or the responding, and that's in the activation agreement. And then we complete the activation agreement. And then if we go down a little bit further, there's a checklist for responding. So again, you can donate the resources, or you can loan them, or you can charge for them. It's really up to the responding jurisdiction on what they decide to do. You'll be on the, you understand you'll be on the operation control of the requesting agency's incident command. Again, the responding political subdivision may ask for reimbursement, and you'll follow the reimbursement procedures, which we will get to in a minute. And then completion at your, so the requesting will complete their portion of the SMAA Form 113, and then the responding one will complete it as well. Again, if you've come to the Division of Emergency Management and ask us to coordinate this mutual aid, then we will coordinate also the signatures and contacting everybody. And that's just, so now if we go back to the screen, so we've looked at the checklist. And again, the checklist isn't mandatory, but again, it just gives you a good couple steps that you should do. And now if we go back to the website and we click out of that, we're going to go down and find Activation Agreement Form 113. And again, it's pretty self-explanatory. We put in the requesting jurisdiction, the responding jurisdiction, contact information, the dates, the end date and the start date. And it says no extensions of time will be granted without written approval of the jurisdiction executive. Again, that's something that we can facilitate. And again, it just comes down to communication, right? Knowing that if it was for 2 or 3 days, we know that as we're getting into that second day, we're going to touch base again and say, are you going to need these resources longer? And then it just has an introduction, kind of what it is, why this form is under the authority it's done. And then it just asks for the signatures on there. Print the name, signature, title, and then a witness too. And that really can be anybody. It can be DEM witnessing it. It could be somebody on your staff. So, and you know, as we continue to evolve with our resources, our technology, the process will still be the same. It may just be a different look, and we may utilize a different tool in the future. So just to be aware of that. But for right now, if it were to happen today and you needed it from DEM, this would be the process. And then I can't remember if there's one more. I think, okay. So that was how to activate an activation agreement. So a mutual aid activation agreement. Pretty simple. Again, now let's say everything's been done, you've demobilized, and it's like, hey, you know, this is kind of awkward, but I need to ask you, County B, for payment. DEM, can you guys do this? Yeah, that's where we come in and we say, okay, based upon the agreement, it was agreed upon that you were going to reimburse them. And then we will have, so again, we'll go to Form 110 on the intergovernmental reimbursement. Just go ahead and click on that. And if any of you have done EMAC, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, this looks a little bit like that, and it's kind of been geared towards that to kind of make it simple. You'll want mission number, again, jurisdictions, dates of missions, and then your costs in there. We've got personnel costs, travel costs, equipment costs, commodities, other costs if they don't seem to fit within one of those categories. We also have any total donated costs and then the grand total. And then at the very bottom, you're just attesting that they are correct to the best of your knowledge. You'll sign that. You will attach all of your documents. So whether those are time cards, equipment cards, gas receipts, food receipts, whatever that may be, you'll attach that and you'll submit that for reimbursement. DEM, again, for the requesting jurisdiction, let's say that they're still trying to mop up things and they're still a little busy. They could say, hey, DEM, do you mind kind of reviewing those, giving them kind of a first review? We could say, yeah, we'll review these things and, you know, let you know if they look good. And obviously they'll still need to review them on their end so that their people can, you know, authorize the reimbursement. And then the reimbursement would be made, and we would consider that kind of the full cycle of DEM facilitating mutual aid under the Statewide Mutual Aid Act for a specific mission. So I think, let's see here. So yeah, that really is what we kind of wanted to focus on today. I know there's a lot of other things about mutual aid. Does anybody have a question right now? We can go into some questions, and if you're not sure what questions you have, I have a couple ones too that we could ask ourselves. So I'll just give you a minute to think about that if you have any questions.
Jonna, you mentioned that these forms are great if the state is going to be brokering these mutual aid activities between jurisdictions. Are these forms that can be used just between entities without the state getting involved as well?
I think that we could give you the templates and then you could customize them to yourself. We probably would want to take off the state seal off of there, and then the jurisdictions could put their own seals on there of their cities or counties. But I have there would be no problem with us just sharing them and say, hey, yeah, take it and make it your own.
We don't have any questions in the chat, so if you'd like to go into the questions that you've prepared, we'll do that.
Sure, absolutely. So the first question is, have you ever worked in an emergency or disaster when a resource has been under the operational direction or control of another jurisdiction? And how has that worked out for you?
So at this point, you can put your answers in the chat or raise your hand or go ahead and unmute to answer this question.
And the reason why I threw that question out there, we go back a couple years to some of the wildfires. Obviously, there was a great response, right? But there was also maybe some lesson learned there as well, as far as, you know, who's actually in charge when my resources get there, and how, kind of what is that on the boots on the ground process to say we're here, assign us, and how do we work, and how does that process work? Like, what has been your experience for those who maybe have not had that opportunity to see in person how that works?
This is Mark Millett. I'll jump in here just real quick. I know in our flooding 4 years ago, I couldn't have been more pleased with the help that we got working through Kimberly, our liaison up here. You know, I knew that Cache County was in a flood fight, and I knew Weber County had been dealing with some challenges, and so I wasn't inclined to necessarily start reaching out to them. So, and I found myself a little bit different here in the county. Rather than having fully opened and activated the EOC, it was kind of on idle. I found myself more down helping with incident command, and I took the role kind of helping to facilitate the planning piece. And so we just did down and dirty, you know, what are the objectives that we need to accomplish, what resources do we have, what resources do we need, and as we identified deficiencies, i.e. we needed more public works folks, right? And we needed more pumps, we need more law enforcement officers, and we identified those. I went ahead and worked with Kimberly, and was right on the phone with the EOC there that day, and well, 2 or 3 times through that event as things kind of changed, but we identified what those needs were, and you know, the next day resources start showing up for that next operational period. We got help from Salt Lake County with Public Works. We ended up with pumps. Highway Patrol sent up additional troopers to help us with our traffic control stuff, and it went great. Now I realize that, you know, the more complex of a situation we find ourselves in, the more challenging that could be. I mean, our wind event this last fall was pretty tough because we had multiple counties involved with you know, that piece on top of, you know, the EOC there, the state trying to manage COVID and earthquake and everything else that we all face. So it started tapping out a lot of resources. But I just know from our events there, we were kind of you know, kind of isolated. Kind of the resources were there and easily available, and it worked out great.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate that. And yeah, I do remember being able to pull from those public works from Salt Lake County and some other places. And again, that's really how mutual aid is supposed to work. Now, with that being said, I think last year taught us a lesson that mutual aid is not the only it's not the only solution. And in fact, this is just one more tool that we want you to put in the, you know, metaphoric toolbox to be able to know that how that would work. Unfortunately, because the wind event did affect so many counties, mutual aid wasn't really an option. So we did have to move more to a state agency and private contracting to address some of the gaps in the resources that were needed in some of the affected counties. Thank you. All right, the next question is, do you have an inventory of your resources, and what tool system are you using? So we know that here at the state, we use WebEOC, and we have been rolling out the National Mutual Aid System, or NMAS, which again, that could be a whole nother presentation. So we're not necessarily looking to talk about those WebEOC or NMAS in detail here today. But those are kind of the most common ones that we know at the state. But are there other tools or systems that you are using that we're unaware of, and have been really useful or really effective in your jurisdictions.
I know UDOT, or not UDOT, excuse me, UTA has told me about a system that they have that can track where their all of their buses are. It will show their locations on maps, so they're geocoded and or geotagged, and um, they use that to understand where their inventory is. I feel like that's a very robust system that is not WebEOC or NMAS, but is a tool they use for tracking their inventory.
Thank you. Yeah, and it seems like every day there are new products coming out, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask the question. I mean, if we even look just at our GIS group a couple of years ago, you typically just think maps, right? But it is so much more, and I've come to realize that. And so I just always like to ask the question, what tools are you using, and is it working for you? And is it something that we should all look at? So just a question I thought I'd throw out there, especially with, having a good pulse on what our inventory of resources are. So this is I really like this question. And do you currently have an MOU or an MOA with another state agency, with a local jurisdiction or an interlocal entity that is specifically for response recovery purposes? Or do you have one that can be utilized for your response and recovery purposes? I know that when we talked a little bit about this with the state emergency response team, there were a whole handful of agreements that we were unaware of, and it was amazing to see how these state agencies outside of kind of the EOC ESF structure, how they operate day in and day out with almost daily incidences that happen. So yeah, that's my question. Do you guys have any MOUs or MOAs that you can think of that you utilize, that you want us to know about? For those who may not have an MOU or an MOA and kind of want to go down that road, I think your responses would kind of help them and point them in the right direction. Not everybody wants.
I'm going to mention one that I know about, Jonna. I attended an exercise with Duchesne and Wasatch and Uinta counties, and they have MOAs or MOUs with a helicopter company to help them respond to incidents that happen where the helicopters are going to be much quicker at getting to the incident than their vehicles would be, because they are so geographically spread out, and the things that can happen in their jurisdiction may not happen on a road or a main highway there where vehicles can access quickly. So I thought that's something that I didn't think many jurisdictions would have, is a contractor relationship with helicopter companies. So that's something to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about what the Division of Emergency Management has. We do have a MOU with Utah Task Force 1, and that has allowed us to make them a state resource in a couple instances. So we have utilized them for the canal breach that was up in Logan several years ago, where unfortunately a family lost their lives. To be able to take care of that and to be able to support local resources. We were able to use them in the Hilldale flooding as well, which we know was a very devastating event for the community down there at large. And then most recently, we utilized them for doing, I don't want to say damage assessments, because damage assessments are not eligible under the public assistance program, but they did do a safety I guess, a safety check on all the buildings that were affected by the earthquakes to see if they were able to be inhabited again or people could enter into them again. And that was something that was able to be done very quickly. And so that's the type of kind of MOUs or MOAs when you think about it, what type of resource gaps do I maybe have, or what is something that I need to augment in a very short time? And as you list those things, that might be, then you'll know kind of where you need to look at to kind of establish those MOUs and MOAs if you don't already have them. Okay, we'll go to the fourth question. Does your MOU or MOA lay out a defined process from beginning to end for how mutual aid is rendered? And the reason why I ask that is this a, just an understanding of a handshake? Is it just saying that County A will help County B and vice versa? But is there a process to know, is everybody on the same page, right? So one, you continue to have that good working relationship, and then expectations are set from the beginning in the kind of that planning agreement stage rather than trying to figure those out in the response crazy, we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off response phase. And if you do have that, what was the process that you went through? Does that require, a city council, a county commission? How do those things go through on the level that's on a local jurisdiction level, political subdivisions? Because typically here on the state, as long as we have an executive, meaning a director, maybe a commissioner, we can usually execute those without having them to go up to the governor's office. And I'm just curious on how that works out on the political subdivision process. Okay, well, if you think about it and you want to let us know, just shoot us an email.
Great.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's all I have.
I was just going to add, Jonna, along that line, for those that maybe don't have a defined process from beginning to end for how your mutual aid will work out, um, I think going back to just this website on the DEM website, the mutual aid forms, looking at what this process is and seeing, is this a process I want to establish for my own jurisdiction, or do I want to rely on statewide mutual aid when I need to get the help from other jurisdictions that may be able to support our jurisdiction. So something to talk about with your executives if you haven't already established a process in your jurisdiction. So I think this is all really helpful information. So I appreciate you presenting this today. So with that, um, we want to thank Jonna Whitesides for your presentation today. And as a reminder, this webinar and all other webinars in this series will be available on the DEM website at dem.utah.gov/exercises or now at dem.utah.gov/I wonder. Our webinar next week will be I Wonder Why We Do Damage Assessments, presented by Jana Wilkinson. If you have any I Wonder topic suggestions, please reach out to tbodley@utah.gov to have your topic added to our calendar. We're always excited to help you explore and get to know all that DEM can offer the emergency management community. Until next time, keep wondering.